Thanks for waiting for this story. Let's start, guys. Mrs. Giggs examined the gold bar presented by the Empress. I'll see what the dress is like and pay for it, but is it okay if I use up these gold bars without leaving a balance? She inquired, wanting to give the impression that the Empress was generous. I brought it specifically for and use it, the Empress replied calmly, sipping on some cold water to soothe her stomach. How is this possible? Adele asked. I don't believe there is any budget for the Empress Palace. Is there no budget for the Empress Palace? At the end of the year, the Emont Imperial Palace prepares the budget for the following year, but since Her Majesty was not present the previous year, the budget was most likely not prepared, Mrs. Giggs explained. So you're saying this is normal? Of course not, Mrs. Giggs replied. Through the emergency supplementary budget system, it is possible to reorganize the budget as much as possible. The issue is that only His Majesty the Emperor has authority over supplementary budgets. Just as the conversation was about to continue, a maid announced the arrival of the owner of the dress shop. Adele and Mrs. Giggs both stood up to greet the new arrival. The Empress gave Mrs. Giggs a friendly pat on the shoulder and smiled, "Take good care of it." "Don't worry." "But where are you going, Your Majesty?" The Empress laughed sarcastically and said, "There is no way to lose if you know your enemy and yourself." It was a smile that made even the elderly lady, who had survived everything from prenatal battles to air battles, feel cold. "Don't be concerned. I'll see you later," the Empress said before adding, "Allow them to stay in my palace today." She then strode away with a smile on her lips. Adele arrived at the Imperial Palace, which housed the Emperor's bedroom and the general meeting room for managing state affairs. The palace was a neat and practical space compared to the magnificent Empress Palace. As Adele walked through the palace, she saw people gathered in groups of 3 and 5, dressed in various uniforms, as if a meeting of the ministers was taking place. When the Empress unexpectedly appeared, they quickly corrected their posture and respectfully bowed their heads as Adele passed through the crowd. "Does it appear that there is a meeting?" Adele asked the gatekeeper as they walked through the front door. "Yes," the gatekeeper politely replied. As soon as the attendants learned of the Empress's visit, they rushed out to greet her. Adele explained the reason for her visit. "I'd like to meet with His Majesty the Emperor," she said. "Her Majesty the Empress, yes," the attendant replied. "If you wait in the drawing room for a while, I will inquire of Your Majesty and respond." "Drawing area?" the Empress asked. "Yes," the attendant replied. The Empress nodded, then narrowed her eyes and tilted her head as if she were thinking about something. "Doesn't the Central News Conference have a waiting room?" "Of course, there is a waiting room, but it isn't as comfortable as the drawing room, to which we will direct you." "It doesn't matter," the Empress said. "I'd also like to see the meeting place of high officials in Emont, so please point me in the right direction." The Empress ordered in a firm tone as if she didn't want any objections, so the attendants had no choice but to obey her. The Emperor sat in the seat of honor with a bored expression. Suddenly, a man's scream interrupted his thoughts. "Oh, Your Majesty!" the man cried out. Please send strikers and keepers our way. Everyone is perishing. They are currently dying." Duke Despoin was annoyed by the man's cries and whines, like a child. "No matter how hard you try, it keeps coming out. Even the flying monster is appearing now, and there is no way to stop it. Unless the striker and keeper take down the tower." "Well, do you know where we're going?" Lennox Poitiers, who sat to the right of the Duke of Despoin, broke the weeping appeal. "Even those who have first and second level towers built on their territory don't say anything right now, right? In any case, what has been constructed in Calvin County is only a 4th grade tower. Didn't you say it's gotten bigger in diameter? It's not even level 4. How can you refuse when the document specifies level 4? Count Calvin swallowed his rage, jumped up from his seat, and kneeled before the Emperor. "Honorable His Majesty the Emperor. Please help me. Your Majesty." Lennox Poitiers, barge on Count. "Seriously, Would the Lord of the Lord come here and ask for assistance? You are self-centered. Bag Poitiers, please stop arguing. Lennox was warned by Duke Balder. Despite being a commoner, he was clearly a striker of exceptional skill, having attained the position of the inheritable count. He did not, however, dare to compete with Duke Balder. Nonetheless, he was arrogant and trusted the Duke of Devonshire and Diane Poitiers. An attendant approached the Emperor. Your Majesty, he said. Her Majesty the Empress is expecting you. Empress? The high-ranking officials who were about to leave paused and looked at the Emperor and his entourage. Yes. She is now waiting for the meeting to end in the conference hall's waiting room. Where do you want to go? Karl, who frowned at those words, sat in his chair and placed his order. Bring her here when the lieutenants leave. That's fine. Meanwhile, in the middle of the senior officials' meeting, the Empress stood up in her waiting room outside the meeting room, her ears perking up. She appeared to be paying attention to what was being said, pausing her movements and concentrating on the voices. Lennox immediately objected to this. Several nobles who had been sitting quietly until now jumped up and shouted. Count Calvin said. What is the point of having a group of magicians? What the hell is the point of staying at the Imperial Palace and not going to places where you really need to go? Lennox Poitiers, barge on Count. What if a Class 1 tower fell in the Imperial Palace while we were on our way to destroy a Class 4 tower? The fight was about to erupt again. The Emperor pounded the table, tired of the meeting itself. Stop. There will be no conclusion. We'll never finish at this rate. Count Calvin, I feel bad for your fief. However, sending magicians your way is deemed unnecessary. Your Majesty, please reconsider it. Emperor, declare the meeting is over now. Seriously, how trashy the Emperor is. Instead of listening to the pleading of his people, he is agreeing with an arrogant brat. Scene shifts, outside of the conference hall. The Duke of Despoin, standing at the front of the crowd, called out to the Empress with a pleasant laugh. My niece-in-law, it's nice to see you here. Everyone in the room looked at the Empress, wondering how she would react to the Duke's disrespectful and inappropriate greeting. However, instead of responding to the Duke's greeting, Adele stared at him calmly and collectedly. Her features were so cold and detached that she seemed almost robotic. The room fell into a tense silence, the atmosphere thick with unease. It was as if the stillness of the sea at night had descended upon the room, bringing with it a sense of unease and foreboding. The Empress's silence only added to the importance of anxiety, causing the air in the room to feel heavy and oppressive. The coldness of thin ice. Adele's gaze was fixed on the Duke, her red lips, pale skin, black hair cascading down her shoulders, and piercing golden eyes all contributed to the eerie atmosphere that seemed to emanate from her very being. The nobles found themselves uncomfortable and uneasy, their skin crawling at the strange aura the Empress exuded. Duke thought I knew you aren't an easy one. He spoke. I am sorry if I offend you, as the elder of the Ulrich royal family. I just wanted to come off as friendly. Finally, in a polite way, the Empress replied, It seems you chose the wrong way, to be perceived as friendly. I hope you would be more careful in future. Duke's response, I will keep this in mind. The Valgier brothers entered, their eyes widening at the sight. Empress Adele and Lionel Valgier's eyes directly, in the dim light of the room, and Lionel found himself unable to look away. Adele gave him a small, almost invisible smile. Greetings, Your Majesty. Oh, Sir Lionel Valgier, it's nice to meet you here. You have good timing. Could you tell me who Count Calvin is? Count Calvin hurried and greeted the Empress, greeting Your Majesty. Empress saw his dull face. She instantly recognized the man. Oh, you are Count Calvin. Her voice cutting through the silence. Did you say that flying monsters would appear? Count Calvin, taken aback by the unexpected question, nodded quickly. Yes, Your Majesty. Adele raised an eyebrow. Is there not a wizard assigned to each region? Lennox Poitiers, standing beside Calvin, answered the question. Wizards are managed by capital, Your Majesty. We are responsible for protecting the entire kingdom. Lennox greets the Empress. My name is Lennox Poitiers. I am the vice captain of the magic department. Empress asks from Lennox. Does not each mont classify towers with aerial monsters as intermediate? From what I heard, no magicians are been sent. Lennox replied, it's a bit worrisome situation, but you didn't need to concern about it. I am doing my best to protect the royal palace so that no monster or tower may come near us. He thought it looks like she wanted to show that she is knowledgeable about the tower, but in reality, she knew nothing. Foolish Empress. Well, mister, it's you who is foolish and judging our heroine. Adele turned to Lennox. She thought he is looking down on me. I see, Empress replied. Of course, Your Majesty. We will do everything in our power to protect the kingdom. The Empress gave a faint smile, then walked past Lennox with a cold expression. I see. Thank you for your explanation. Adele nodded, then turned to the attendant waiting at the door. I am ready now. Please lead me to His Majesty the Emperor. The attendant nodded and opened the door. Your Majesty, you may come in. He stood aside to allow Adele to pass. You heard him. It was nice to meet all of you, she said. Then she went for the conference hall. All nobles kept staring her. Lionel thought she had maintained her poise and dignity, using her silence, her stern gaze, and her refined yet cold demeanor to assert her authority. It was a presence that belonged to someone born to rule. As they walked away, Lionel couldn't help but glance back at the door through which Adele had disappeared, wondering what the future held for the powerful and commanding Empress. She didn't change. Our handsome hero's standard is Empress. Well, viewers, we can't complain since our Empress is so majestic. Our beautiful heroine Adele enters the room. The Emperor's cold gaze was fixed on Adele as she entered the meeting room. She didn't offer a greeting. As soon as the door closed, the Emperor asked impatiently, So, what do you want to say? Adele was unfazed by his demeanor, meeting his gaze with her steady eyes. Why did you request a national marriage? Emperor replies, What do you mean? Why did you make me Empress in the first place? I am sure it was you who asked for a national marriage. The Emperor was silent for a moment, considering his words. Finally, he looked up at Adele and spoke softly, his eyes as dark as a mountain valley. It just exists. Like a feather on this quill, it just exists. The quill's sole existence is for decoration only. Just by being there, you fulfill your purpose. Well, yeah, you are also just fulfilling the role of a jerk just by simply existing. She seemed to freeze her air currents, which had only been cold. Keep the pride of Adelaide, who had once been the crown princess of Gotrov, was crumpled. Her crumpled pride shattered like shredded paper, not even the nib or stem of the pen. He saw her as a useless part feather of the quill. She replies to the Emperor, I should only fulfill my role as Empress. Is that what you want? Then why did you have to hurt my prestige? I never did that, Emperor replied. Adele laughed at the firm answer. It seemed pointless even to enumerate her humiliations at her wedding and banquet. So Adele drove him away with her sharper words. Did you do it because you were afraid that I might harm Diane Poitiers? Even the Emperor, who had objected so far, was silent about the question. After all, that was the reason. I want that too. I will fulfill my responsibilities as Empress Aimante, and carry out my duty as Empress. Your Majesty, please cooperate so that I can fulfill my responsibilities. Emperor asked, what kind of cooperation are you talking about? First of all, I need to learn about Empire. I need someone to consult to understand this place. The best way to do this is to ask the person who is in charge of the palace. And I'm afraid it's Diane Poitiers. It would be difficult for me to call her advice. Emperor Karl had nothing to say. So I would like to consult with Countess Hannah Giggs, who was the previous general manager. It will soon be known that Mrs. Giggs entered the palace, so Adele took the lead in advance. Hannah Gigg, Emperor replied in a cold tone. I'm asking for your understanding because Your Majesty sent her out of the palace. However, we will not have her as the general manager. Karl, who had been agonizing for a while, nodded and agreed because there was no justification to refuse. Thank you, and one more thing, the Empress Palace doesn't have a budget. I ask for an urgent supplementary budget. Adele asked the emperor in a businesslike tone. This time the emperor was speechless. A budget for the empress palace, the emperor nodded, understanding the empress' request. Adele turns and walked out of the room. The emperor watched her leave, a small smile on his face. He knew the empress was strong, capable, and confident she would handle the challenges ahead. As the door closed behind the empress, Emperor Karl exhaled a long breath and rubbed his forehead with his hand. He could still see the image of the empress, dressed in the red gown that symbolized her status, fluttering in front of him like an illusion. Whoa, he muttered to himself, trying to calm his racing heart. Even after becoming the emperor, the afterimages of his past continued to haunt him. He remembered the fluttering hem of a red dress and the tiny hands of a child trying to grab onto it but never quite reaching the hem. My poor son, his birth mother had said to him. The empress will never acknowledge you. And she had been right. Karl had wanted to be recognized by the perfect-looking woman who loved to wear red, but she had never acknowledged him. When calmed down, he thought the empress palace budget hasn't been revised. With a deep sigh, Karl gave an order to the attendants who had entered the meeting room. Call Diane, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Yes, Your Majesty. A while later, Diane entered the meeting room and called the emperor with a warm and fresh voice, like a spring breeze. Your Majesty, why did you call me? The emperor, Karl, who had been deep in thought with narrowed eyebrows, raised his head at the sound of the voice. Did you bring the imperial budget? The emperor asked for it right away. She replied, Yes, Your Majesty. Karl picked up the budget bill that Diane had brought and quickly glanced over it. As Adele had said, the Empress Palace had yet to be budgeted. Why wasn't there an emergency supplementary budget for the Empress Palace budget? This should have also been included in the preparations for the Empress. Diane's eyes widened in surprise at the Emperor's low questioning. Oh my God, didn't I? What should I do, Your Majesty? Oh God, I'm sorry. I thought I had done it but I forgot. In an instant, both eyes were stained red, and she was confused, not knowing what to do. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I was immature. The Empress must be displeased. How can I fix this, Your Majesty? Stop it, you only need to revise it, the Emperor said. Tears suddenly fell from her eyes. Karl sighed and took out his handkerchief, and handed it to her. Stop crying. You have too many tears, stop crying. You're such a crybaby. Mistress, the Empress must have been displeased. What do I do, Your Majesty? Again. She reminds me of her. What should I do? Karl stared blankly at the woman who lowered her shoulders, trembled, and wiped away her tears for a long time. It seemed like he was thinking about something again. It was his mother. Tell me you have mommy issues without telling me you have mommy issues. Your Majesty, is there anything you want to say? The mistress had bad feelings about her summon. Suddenly, the Emperor spoke. The Empress' original authority has already been transferred to the Empress Palace. In addition, I will take back the authority of the palace ministry that I entrusted to you. I will delegate it to the Empress later. Mistress shocked. Scene shifts. Both brothers are on their way in a carriage. Lionel's elder brother spoke. The Duke of Despoin was the one who dared to recommend the Princess of Gotthove across the sea as the Empress, just to make a scarecrow Empress. But it seems like he failed. Lionel. Yes, she is the person who can dominate people merely with her face. She was someone who knew how to control the atmosphere with just one hand. Seeing that, Theseus understood why the late Empress Dowager Gottrov would use her spirit and try to send his daughter across the sea. Since the newly crowned emperor was only 14 years old, Geisen's sister wouldn't have been able to help much in strengthening imperial authority. Lionel, are you listening to me? Looking out the window, recalling the Empress. No, from the first time they met the Empress at Emont, she had been stuck in his head. He vividly remembered the image of the Empress, smiling as she rode her horse, wild but carefree. My man is literally simping for her. In the Empress Palace. As Adele sat in the Empress Palace, sipping her lemon tea, Mrs. Giggs sat across from her, observing her closely. Have you paid for the dress, Mrs. Giggs? Empress asked. Mrs. Giggs noticed the luxurious red silk dress adorned with ornate gold threads that Adele was wearing. No, it's not that. It's just that. Did you see the design of the dress that I ordered? Adele asked hesitantly. Yes, I did. But it seems that you are wearing a different dress. Did you choose this one instead? Mrs. Giggs inquired. Well, I didn't exactly choose it. The ladies-in-waiting choose, Adele admitted, frowning. Emont-style clothing is unfamiliar, and I didn't pay much attention to the design of the clothing even when I was in my home country. I will return the finished dress and order again. Please wear ready-made clothes for the time being. Is this design out of formality? Adele asked. At Adele's question, Mrs. Giggs shook her head. No, it is not a matter of formality. It is a design that looks very much like the late Her Majesty. Adele was surprised. She asked, but why? It's because the dress closely resembles Her Majesty's style. It's as if you've inherited the clothes of Her Majesty, the previous Empress. It was natural that Adele did not readily understand that. What do you mean? Yes, perhaps that was the issue. While the crowns of previous empresses were also inherited, Adele hadn't considered the design of the clothes to be of much importance. His Majesty the Emperor will be thrilled by a dress that reminds him of the late Empress. Don't wear it as much as possible. Her Majesty, there is no benefit in doing so. No benefit, Empress response. Yes. That's right. Her Majesty the former Empress and the present Emperor did not get along very well. Lady Kix was the late Empress' right hand and a person who was kicked out of the royal palace by the Emperor. It would be better to trust her words regarding this matter. All right, you may do that. I need more trustworthy people. Ah, I also need to meet with Count Calvin. Summon him to the Empress's palace. The scene shifts to Ivory Palace. Diane shut herself in her room. Tears poured down her face as she cried uncontrollably. Eventually, she clutched her stomach with both hands and cried out. She thought, how easy it is for Empress to rob her power like that. Empress must have done something to get back her authority. That woman was born a princess and she always had everything without any effort. It's not fair. She hit her chest hard and laughed through her tears, her face distorted and stained by her crying. She gets from her bed and, pulling the thick blackout curtains. She looked at the brightly lit room with determination, taking in the marble floor that shone like a pearl, the golden moldings, the ceiling embroidered with masterpieces, and the chandelier made with thousands of crystals woven together. This was the most beautiful, Ivory Palace and, it was said to be the most beautiful in Emont. It's where Emperor's biological mother always wanted to live. The palace was given by the Emperor to me. That woman won't defeat me. That woman who has nothing but her title, I will make her powerless, and then she will realize her place, she muttered. Scene shifts to the Empress Palace. Here's your queen, Mrs. Giggs announced Adele's arrival. Count Calvin quickly rose to his feet and turned to greet her. When was the tower descend? Adele asked, cutting straight to the point. The Count was taken aback by the question. Empress asked, first there was surely no flying demon, but over time, did it appear? Adele continued, is the diameter of the tower getting wider? You are right, Count replied. I ran when I saw the flying monster. No one had weapons to defend against the beasts, regardless of age or gender. From the elderly who've lost all their teeth to children just entering puberty, everyone is fighting for survival. When the Empress asked about the absence of strikers and keepers, the Count explained that they were normally dispatched based on tower level. Empress inquire, the tower is level 4 but still no support is sent. Count replied, many times even for level 2 towers, capital never send their support. Empress murdered, that's no different than telling the whole area to die. Please, Your Majesty, the Count begged, tears streaming down his face, people are dying. The weak and slow, including women and children, are being torn apart by the beasts. Even the trained knights of the territory have died from exhaustion. It's a living hell. Mrs. Kix, who was nearby, interrupted the Count. She gave the Count a warning not to use such unrefined words in front of Empress. Sorry, he apologized, but the Empress replied, no, you don't know that you expressed hell in a purified way. Her mind was consumed by a vivid memory of hell. She saw the bloody skies, the monstrous, the smoke, the screams of the people, the bodies scattered everywhere, and the pools of blood. Mothers wept for their lost children, and children shook the dead bodies of their parents, begging for them to wake up. The tower had appeared in the world suddenly one day, causing chaos and destruction. But, as humans always do, they found ways to adapt. Wizards, who could control the magic of the tower, emerged, and the roles of strikers and keepers, along with knights, became crucial in climbing to the top. Empress remembered her mother's words. Her mother saw the crisis as an opportunity. Her mother said, "Does Adele, you really think you can save the world? There is no need. All you have to close your eyes and cover your ears, for a while, and then I will give you the world." Mother, Adele spoke up, breaking the silence. You say such cruel things because you have not seen the misery of those who have died. You don't have to offer me the world. Her words marked the beginning of her strained relationship with her mother. Eventually, her mother took the crown from Adele. Coming back to reality, Adele looked at the Count, who stood before her with his white hair and wrinkled face, and his rough, bloodless lips. Your Majesty, thank you for your concern, the Count said with a smile. I apologize, but I must return to my territory as soon as possible, so I must go now. Evacuate the inhabitants to nearby estates, the Empress said, her voice squeaky. The Empress stood up, her face showing genuine concern. The best hiding place to prevent flying spells is caves or underground spaces. Evacuate the elderly and weak there. If you take refuge far from the tower and join with various lords, it'll be more effective. You can endure longer and put pressure on the capital. Then the Empress paused and turned her head towards Mrs. Kick. Mrs. Kick gave Count some gold bars. Take it. In a trembling voice, Count asks, why are you giving this to me? Empress replied, I am certain that with this, your citizens and others can survive for a little while. She apologizes to Count, 'cause she could not help him. Why did the Empress summon Count Calvin? Theseus asked, gazing out at the late summer landscape. Lionel, focusing on the documents before him, replied, curious about the situation? Surprisingly, the Emperor would abandon the Count of Calvin, Theseus mused. He's always been a loyal servant to the imperial family. I agree, Lionel said, looking up from his work. Until now, most of the lands abandoned by the Emperor belonged to families that disobeyed him. Never mind. Count Calvin's carriage is arriving, Theseus said. The Count appeared to be in distress, tears streaming down his face. Lionel grabs Count's shoulder and asks, what's the wrong, Count? What happens in the Empress's palace? The Count revealed a pouch from his bosom. She gave me this. With this, she told me to ask to evacuate the residents in the nearby territories. Now the Count is about to leave the Duke's mansion. He apologizes for the inconvenience, leaving like this, because he wants to evacuate his people as soon as possible. Theseus gave Count a bag of gold bars too. I'm sorry I couldn't be of direct help, Theseus said sympathetically to Count Calvin. The Count shook his head. Don't say this, Duke. This old man feels ashamed. The sun began to set as the Count's carriage disappeared from view. It was unforeseen from Her Majesty, Theseus said. Lionel thought about how the Empress helped Count by giving gold bars, then blushed a bit. Ah, so cute of him. Now in the Empress Palace, our heroine is sad. There was nothing I could do except give him gold bars. You did the best within your authority. Count Calvin went back fully grateful, Your Majesty. At that, Adele smiled and shook her head, within my authority of what I can do. She remembered her mother's words, Adele, you are smart. However, this world is a place established by smart people, but ruled by wise people. And that's why you need to be a wise person. She murmured, The reason she endured all humiliation and could not help but count, was because she has no power. In this unfamiliar land, she will take only wise action that will help her to gain power. Your Majesty, why don't you request a meeting with His Majesty? Mrs. Kick suggested. She said it would be good for her to maintain a cordial relationship with His Majesty. A relationship that is friendly and sincere but not overly close. Adele agreed with Mrs. Kick. Mrs. Kicks helps Empress to get ready for dinner. She applied light makeup to Adele's face. You are beautiful, Mrs. Giggs sincerely praised Adele. Her reflection in the mirror was beautiful even when she saw herself. But strangely in a dirty mood, Adele bit her lip and lowered her gaze. Adele agreed with Mrs. Kick because she knew it was important to get along with the Emperor first. The scene shifts to the Emperor's palace. Attendant informed the Emperor that Empress has arrived. The moment Empress entered an Emperor's room, Emperor's attention was immediately drawn to her simple achromatic dress, a far cry from her usual bold red Empress's attire. Her black hair was styled to one side, exposing the nape of her neck and collarbones. Her natural pallor was emphasized in the dimly lit room, drawing his gaze to her collarbones that were accentuated by the flickering lanterns. Her golden eyes and clear red lips completed the captivating sight, and Carl found himself momentarily lost in her beauty. As she took a seat opposite him, he asked in a hushed voice, "What brings you to me tonight?" "I came because I thought it might not be time for dinner." "How about having dinner together?" Adele replied, hoping to change the subject. The Emperor was taken aback by Adele's suggestion but quickly regained his composure. "Even if it's not so, I was just about to contact you because I had something I wanted to ask you," he said. "Please speak," Adele replied. "Please speak," Adele replied. "Why did you summon Count Calvin?" The Emperor asked with a smile on his face. "Why did you call him Empress?" he demanded. Adele felt like she was facing a harsh north wind as she stared into the Emperor's cold, unrelenting eyes. She quickly regained her composure and replied, "I called him because I was worried about his situation," said Adele. "Why are you?" the Emperor replied. "What do you mean?" Adele asked. "His land is being destroyed by towers, but I did not save him. He just sent back the one who ran to save him." But the Empress called him again. From what he heard, the Empress seems to have given him gold bars. "What are you doing now?" the Emperor demanded. Adele wondered if the news of the gold bars had already reached the Emperor's ears. She was speechless with embarrassment as the Emperor continued to berate her. "You want to play a good role alone?" Unlike the Emperor, the Empress has a generous heart. "Do you want to hear this?" he accused Empress. Empress didn't understand what he is thinking. She then opened her mouth and said, "I summoned Count Calvin only to ask about his situation and gave him some advice on evacuating the fief citizens with some compensation money. Why are you interrogating me like I committed a sin? From now on, close your eyes and ears, see only good things, and think only good things, Empress," the Emperor spoke. "It's the least a human being could do to another human being." "Are you saying I'm not human?" the Emperor asked with a hint of amusement. He said, "It's funny, just because you're the Empress. Do you seriously believe that my people, whom you've never seen before, are your people, in such a short time, too?" Adele opened her mouth but quickly shut her eyes. She felt nauseous. He knew she couldn't stay like this any longer. She reminded herself that she only lived once and must seize the moment. She saw that the Emperor had lightly grasped her black hair, which was braided to one side. He ran his fingertips through her hair while gazing at her hollowed-out collarbone, so delicate that it seemed as thin as his fingers. Would it break if he squeezed it too hard? The Emperor impulsively tilted his head, and their shoulders almost collided. The tip of his nose touched her white nape, and Adele reflexively shrugged her shoulders and held her breath. The Emperor's jaw quivered, and he gritted his teeth. Pressing his nose to her collarbone, he took a deep breath, savoring her sweet scent. Was she the same woman who had dominated the crowd with her gaze? As the Emperor stood up, then he leaned close to Adele's face but stopped abruptly as he caught a glimpse of her golden eyes, fierce like those of a wild beast. Adele's stiff shoulders and raised eyes clearly reveal her anger. Seeing her fury, the emperor tilted his head and smiled seductively. Did you come to me tonight to spend the night with me? If you want a hug, I can give you one. It wouldn't hurt to have our first night tonight. Adele clenched her fists. The empress had intended to wish her emperor well, but his expression, attitude, and inconsiderate words made her feel dirty and humiliated. She felt a wave of anger and frustration wash over her. I guess spending our first night today is not too bad. I'm going to kiss you, so close your eyes. Stop. Adele refused to close her eyes. Instead, she met the emperor's gaze with pride. Karl raised his hand to touch her eyes, but Adele slapped it away. I know you were once the crown princess of Gotrov, and your eyes are truly fit for an emperor. But you are now the empress. Do not forget that I am the emperor of this place. I prefer a compliant and submissive woman. Do not meddle in my work again. Do you understand? Then Emperor left the room. Adelaide's powerful legs, which had withstood a catastrophic disaster from the sky, trembled with weakness at the humiliation that had hit her like a tsunami. Her composure crumbled. Viewers, let me explain why Empress Adele suddenly feels sick. It's not because she is afraid, it's because her mana start overflowing again, cause of all her emotions. Your Majesty the Empress? Adele, lost in thought as she walked, came to a sudden halt at the sound of the voice. Your Majesty the Empress, the voice belonged to Diane Poitiers. A person Adelaide would least want to meet right now. Mistress. Your Majesty, your hands are trembling. Your body is shaking. Adele orders her to step aside. But Mistress stand there and said, Your Majesty, you look beautiful. Looks like you followed my advice. But something must have gone wrong. Is that why you're running away? What? Adele growled with a ferocious face, but Diane smiled and said one more word. It would be better if you apply the makeup a bit thicker, since you have a pale complexion. Well, I'll excuse myself now. Mistress and her maids left for the Emperor's room. As the Empress had a headache, she rushes. The moment she rushed down the stairs as if she was running away, her legs gave out, and her body leaned forward. Adele gritted her teeth and involuntarily closed her eyes tightly. However, as soon as she closed her eyes, she felt a firm force supporting her shoulders. Empress, are you all right? A low, soothing voice whispered into Adele's ear. She stared blankly at him for a moment, then muttered his name as if in a daze, Lionel Valgier. They both kept staring at each other for a while. And our manhwa I Surrender My Position as Empress, Part 3 ends here. Thanks for watching, my dear friends. If you want to hear a little spoiler, then keep listening, otherwise skip. Soon everyone will realize how powerful our Empress is and the whole empire will simp for her. If you want us to continue, then please type Empress Adele and Sir Lionel. Well, thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Till then, bye.